Paris, 1775. You step into a candlelit salon, the air thick with the cloying scent of rosewater, lavender, and something less pleasant trotting grease. Heavy and sour, curling at the edges of your senses, the room hums with the rustle of silk skirts and the soft clink of crystal glasses. Chandeliers drip wax onto the parquet floor, casting flickering shadows across powdered faces and towering wigs that defy gravity. These are not mere hairstyles. They are architectural marvels, sculpted heaps of curls and flower-dusted pompadours, some rising 3 feet high, adorned with feathers, ribbons, and miniature ships swaying precariously atop their peaks. The aristocracy of France is gathered here, each head a canvas of wealth and ambition. But something is wrong. A piercing scream shatters the murmur of polite conversation. All eyes turn to a countess, her face pale beneath layers of ceruse, her hands clawing at the monstrous wig perch on her head. Something moves within it, a faint skittering, a ripple beneath the powdered surface. A rat, bold and black, darts from the labyrinth of horsehair, vanishing into the folds of her gown. Gasps ripple through the room, but no one is truly surprised. These wigs, these grotesque crowns of status, are not just fashion. They are ecosystems, teeming with secret sand vermin. Why, you wonder, would anyone construct such absurd monuments on their heads? Why would they slather them with mutton fat, a rancid lure for pests? And why, in the name of all that is sane, would rats take up residence in these towering creations? The answers lie not in beauty, but in power and a madness that gripped the French court. These wigs were not mere adornments. They were performances, declarations of dominance in a world obsessed with appearances. And yet, beneath the grandeur, something sinister was brewing, a story of excess, absurdity, and a society teetering on the edge of collapse. The wigs whispered their secrets, and those whispers carried the weight of an era. To understand them, we must step back into a time when hair became a battlefield, where status was measured in inches of height, and where the line between elegance and insanity blurred into a grotesque spectacle. In 18th century France, appearances were everything. The court of Versailles was a glittering prison of etiquette, where every gesture, every gown, every curl was a calculated move and a relentless game of status. Society was a pyramid, with the king and queen at its apex, nobles clawing for proximity, and the lower classes pressed into the shadows. To be seen was to exist. To be unseen was to vanish. In this world, fashion was not frivolous, it was a language of power, and no one spoke it louder than Marie Antoinette. The young queen, barely out of her teens, when she arrived from Austria, became the epicenter of French style. Her whims shaped the court, and her obsession with excess birthed the pouf, a wig so extravagant it redefined fashion. These were no ordinary coiffures. Poufs were towering, gravity-defying structures, built on wire frames and padded with horsehair, wool, and even cork. They were canvases for spectacle. One might feature a miniature ship, its sails billowing in mockery of naval battles. Another might cradle a gilded birdcage, a live canary chirping within. Some wigs bore entire landscapes, pastoral scenes with tiny trees and streams crafted from silk, while others carried political satire, like a wig adorned with a tiny guillotine, a dark jest at the unrest simmering beyond the palace walls. The pouf was more than fashion, it was a throne atop the head. The taller the wig, the closer you stood to the divine right of kings. Aristocrats competed fiercely, their wigs growing ever more ostentatious, each inch a claim to superiority. Hairdressers, like the famed Leonard, became celebrities, wielding combs and powders like scepters. A single wig could take hours to construct, requiring teams of servants and a fortune in materials. The cost was irrelevant. To falter was to admit weakness. In a society where a misplaced ribbon could spark a scandal, the poof was a declaration. I am untouchable. But these wigs were not just symbols, they were battlegrounds. They carried the weight of a rigid class hierarchy, where nobles clung to their privileges as the poor starved outside Versailles gates. Marie Antoinette's poufs, adorned with jewels and allegories, were a celebration of royal excess, but they also sowed resentment. To the common people, these wigs were not art but arrogance, a flaunting of wealth and a nation buckling under debt. The poof was a crown, yes, but it was also a target. As the wigs grew taller, so did the absurdity. What began as a display of elegance spiraled into a fevered dream of excess, and beneath the surface, the cracks were forming not just in the wigs, but in the society they adorned. The stage was set for a reckoning, one that would begin with the grotesque realities hidden within those powdered towers. The candle-lit salons of 18th century France shimmered with opulence, but beneath the powdered perfection of the towering poof wigs lay grim reality, one that crawled, skittered, and festered. These elaborate hairstyles, celebrated as the pinnacle of aristocratic refinement, were not just symbols of power. They were breeding grounds for filth and vermin. The very materials that gave these wigs their grandeur, horsehair, wired flour, and rancid animal fat, transformed them into grotesque ecosystems, where beauty and decay coexisted in a delicate, disgusting balance. Creating a poof was no simple task. Hairdressers began with a wire cage, a skeletal frame that could stretch a wig to dizzying heights. Over this, they layered horsehair, wool, or even the wearer's own locks, teased and patted into voluminous shapes. To hold this architectural marvel together, stylists turned to a peculiar adhesive. Mutton tallow, a greasy paste rendered from sheep fat, slathered generously into the wig's structure. It gave the poof its sheen and staying power, ensuring that curls stayed lofty and ornaments stayed pinned. But mutton fat, while effective, was a volatile choice. In the humid air of Versailles, it turned rancid within days, exuding a sour stench that no amount of rosewater could mask. The wigs became a siren call to pests, lice, fleas, and, most alarmingly, rats. These were no fleeting visitors. The towering wigs, often worn for weeks without cleaning, offered rats a paradise of warmth, grease, and edible debris. Flour used to powder the wigs and give them their ghostly white finish, dusted the hair like snow, collecting in crevices and providing a feast for rodents. Servants whispered of wigs that rustled in the night, of aristocrats aching to the sensation of tiny claws scrabbling across their scalps. One duchess, it was said, discovered a nest of newborn rats tucked into the upper reaches of her poof, their pink bodies wriggling among her silk ribbons. The horror was real, yet the aristocracy pressed on, undeterred by the vermin that shared their crowns. Maintaining these wigs was a logistical nightmare. Washing them was rare to time-consuming, to costly, and to likely to collapse the delicate structure. Instead, aristocrats endured their scalps itching beneath layers of grease and powder. To sleep, many were forced to adopt bizarre rituals. Some propped themselves upright on specially designed chairs, their necks braced to preserve the wig's shape. Others used wooden headrests lying flat but rigid, as if entombed in their own vanity. The alternative was unthinkable. A flattened booth was a social death sentence, a public admission of failure in the relentless game of appearances. The rat problem grew so dire that innovation followed. Enter the rat trap for the head, a grimly practical invention. These were small wire cages or sticky strips hidden within the wig's structure, designed to capture or deter the furry intruders. Servants became unwitting exterminators, tasked with combing through their masters' wigs at night, plucking out lice, fleas, and the occasional rat with long-handled tools. One account describes a lady's maid who, during a midnight inspection, extracted a live rat from her mistress's wig, only to have it bite her finger and scamper into the darkness. Such stories were whispered in the servants' quarters, half horrified, half amused, as the absurdity of aristocratic life became impossible to ignore. Yet, for all their filth, these wigs remained the ultimate status symbol. To abandon them was to reject the court's unspoken code. Duty required sacrifice, and sacrifice demanded entrance. The rats, the grease, the unbearable itch, they were all part of the performance, a testament to one's devotion to the hierarchy. But this devotion came at a cost, one far greater than discomfort. The wigs, for all their splendor, were ticking time bombs poised to exact a toll on body and soul. If the towering wigs of 18th century France were a gamble with hygiene, they were also a dance with danger. The pursuit of beauty in the court of Versailles was not merely uncomfortable, it was perilous, a ritual of self-destruction cloaked in elegance. The same wigs that housed rats and reeked of rancid fat inflicted a litany of physical torments, from chronic pain to deadly fires. Yet, in a society where suffering was synonymous with nobility, these costs were worn like badges of honor. The physical toll began with the scalp. Beneath the layers of horsehair and tallow, aristocrats' heads were battlegrounds. The mutton fat, slathered thickly to maintain the wig's structure, irritated the skin, causing rashes and open sores. Lice and fleas, thriving in the unwashed crevices, turned itching into agony. Some nobles resorted to scratching with long, ornate sticks designed to reach beneath the wig without disturbing its shape. These tools, often encrusted with jewels, were as much a status symbol as the wigs themselves, a grim irony, beautifying the act of scratching a festering wound. The powders used to achieve the wig's signature pallor were another silent killer, composed of wheat flour, starch, and often lead-based compounds. These powders were dusted onto the hair in choking clods. Lead, prized for its ability to create a smooth, white finish, was a poison lurking in plain sight. Prolonged exposure led to hair loss, leaving aristocrats ironically bald beneath their elaborate wigs. Worse still were the systemic effects. Lead poisoning caused fatigue, headaches, and, in severe cases, organ failure. Doctors of the time, unaware of the toxicity, prescribed more powder to cover the symptoms, trapping their patients in a cycle of decay. The weight of the wigs was another torment. A fully adorned poof could weigh up to 10 pounds, a crushing burden on the neck and spine. aristocrats developed chronic pain. Their shoulders stooped and their necks stiffened from hours of balancing these monstrous creations. Some resorted to corset-like neck braces hidden beneath lace collars to support their heads during long soirees. Yet to remove the wig or slouch was unthinkable. Posture was a measure of character, and to falter was to invite scorn. Perhaps the most chilling danger was fire. The salons of Versailles were lit by thousands of candles, their flames flickering perilously close to the grease-soaked wigs. Mutton tallow, highly flammable, turned a stray spark into a catastrophe. Stories abounded of wigs catching fire at balls, the wearer's screams drowned out by the crackle of burning hair and fabric. One marquise, it was said, lost half her wig to a chandelier's flame, or frantic dance to extinguish it mistaken for a new courtly step. Servants kept buckets of water at the ready, but fires were frequent, and scars both physical and social lingered long after the flames were doused. Despite these horrors, the aristocracy persisted. To appear natural was vulgar, a betrayal of the coarse ethos. Duty was not meant to be easy. It was a trial, a proof of one's worthiness to stand among the elite. The infections, the pain, the poison, the fires, they were all sacrifices on the altar of status. To suffer was noble, to endure was divine. But as the wigs grew taller and the dangers multiplied, they became more than a personal burden. They became a symbol of a society rotting from within, a glittering facade masking a nation on the brink of collapse. The stage was set for a revolution, and the wigs, once a mark of power, would soon become a death warrant. In the twilight of the 18th century, the towering wigs of France's aristocracy stood as proud emblems of privilege, their curls and flower-dusted peaks a defiant proclamation of untouchable status. But as the French Revolution ignited, these same wigs, once the glittering armor of the elite, transformed into targets, marking their wearers for a brutal reckoning. The pouf, with its extravagant feathers and jewel-encrusted ships, became a symbol of excess, so grotesque it fueled the rage of a starving nation in the shadow of the guillotine. The wigs that had once crowned the powerful now crowned their downfall, a final, ironic flourish in a world unraveling. By 1789, France was a powder keg. The common people, crushed by taxes and hunger, watched the aristocracy parade through Versailles, their wigs towering like monuments to indifference. The pouf, with its miniature landscapes and satirical ornaments, was no longer a mere fashion statement. It was a political provocation. A wig adorned with a tiny golden coach mocked the royal family's opulence, while another, sporting a model of a windmill, seemed to taunt the peasants who toiled to grind flour they could not afford. To the sans-culottes, the revolutionary masses, these hairstyles were not art, but evidence proof of a ruling class so detached it could only be uprooted. Marie Antoinette, the queen who had made the pouf a cultural juggernaut, became its most infamous casualty. Her wigs, once the envy of Europe, were now caricatured in pamphlets as grotesque symbols of decadence. Revolutionary artists depicted her with wigs so tall they scraped the heavens, stuffed with the spoils of a plundered nation. The reality was no less damning. Her hairdressers labored for hours to maintain her signature post, even as bread riots erupted in Paris. When the royal family was imprisoned in 1792, Marie Antoinette's wigs were stripped of their grandeur, but the damage was done. The pouf had become her crown of infamy, a beacon for revolutionary fury, as the revolution gained momentum. The wigs themselves became dangerous. Aristocrats who once flaunted their towering hairstyles now faced a grim choice: abandon them and risk social ruin, or wear them and invite suspicion. To sport a poof in public was to declare allegiance to the old regime, a reckless act in a city where revolutionary tribunals sentenced nobles to death for less. Some aristocrats tried to adapt, scaling down their wigs or hiding them beneath plain bonnets, but the guillotine was unforgiving. The blade did not discriminate between a modest coif and a 3-foot poof. It saw only privilege. The guillotine's shadow loomed largest over the Place de la Revolution, where the condemned faced their fate. Many aristocrats, in a final act of defiance or delusion, went to their deaths with their wigs intact. The executioner's blade sliced through horsehair and tallow as easily as flesh, and the crowds roared as these once majestic symbols fell to the dirt. One noble woman, the Comtesse de Provence, was said to have adjusted her wig moments before her execution, ensuring its curls were perfect as she knelt. Another, a minor baron, refused to remove his poof, declaring it his last dignity. The irony was stark. The wigs, crafted to elevate their wearers above the masses, now framed their heads as they met the same fate as common criminals. Marie Antoinette's final moments crystallized this paradox. On October 16, 1793, she ascended the scaffold with her hair shorn, her once glorious poufs replaced by a simple cap. Yet the memory of her wigs lingered, a specter in the crowd's jeers. The queen who had made hair a throne was now stripped of it, her fall a warning to all who dared to flaunt their privilege. The wigs, once tools of control, had become emblems of doom, their collapse mirroring the collapse of the monarchy itself. As the blade fell, it severed not just lives, but an era one where beauty and power were one, and both were paid for in blood. The wigs of 18th century France, with their rat-infested curls and flammable grease, are long gone, relegated to the dusty corners of history. The salons of Versailles have crumbled, and the guillotine's blade has rusted, yet, as we stand in the 21st century, surrounded by our own rituals of beauty and status, a haunting question lingers. Are we truly so different? The poufs may have vanished, but their spirit endures, whispering through the mirrors of our modern world a reminder that vanity, like power, always exacts a price today. We no longer pile horsehair into towering sculptures or smear our scalps with mutton fat, but the pursuit of beauty remains a theater of sacrifice. High heels pinch and deformed feet, their sharp points echoing the neck braces of old. Cosmetic surgeries reshape bodies at the cost of pain, scars, and sometimes life itself. Extreme diets starve the body to sculpt it, while social media filters sculpt the soul, presenting curated selves to a faceless audience. The tools have changed, but the impulse is the same: to be seen, to be admired, to rise above the crowd. The poof was a performance of power. Our Instagram feeds are no less theatrical, the parallels run deeper. Just as the aristocracy of Versailles used wigs to signal their place in a rigid hierarchy, we use fashion, fitness, and flawless selfies to navigate our own social ladders. The influencer, with their meticulously curated aesthetic, is not so far removed from the countess adjusting her poof before a ball. Both wield appearance as currency, trading it for influence, validation, or power, And just as the poof invited rats, our modern beauty rituals invite their own parasites: anxiety, comparison, and the relentless pressure to perform. The comments section, with its praise and vitriol, is our guillotine, ready to cut down those who falter. The health risks, too, echo the past. The lead powders of the 18th century find their descendants in the chemicals of cosmetics and hair dyes, some linked to cancers and allergies. Weight loss drugs and extreme cosmetic procedures carry risks as grave as the infections that plague the wig wearers. Even the act of chasing trends, whether a viral makeup look or a fitness challenge, mirrors the aristocratic obsession with staying ahead of the curve, no matter the cost. We may not sleep upright to preserve our hairstyles, but we sacrifice sleep to perfect our online personas, scrolling through the night to keep up with the endless race for relevance. The French Revolution show what happens when vanity becomes a symbol of disconnect. The Poofs, with their absurd excess, fueled resentment that toppled a monarchy today. The gap between the curated lives of the elite and the struggles of the many sparks its own unrest. Social media amplifies this divide, showcasing influencers with private jets while others scrape by. The backlash brews not in pamphlets, but in hashtags, in calls for authenticity that echo the revolutionary cries for equality. Yet, like the aristocrats who clung to their wigs, we cling to our filters, our brands, our illusions of control. The story ends with a haunting image: a once grand wig, abandoned in the ruins of a chateau. Its curls collapsed, its ribbons frayed. The rats have fled, the grease is dry, but the madness lingers, whispering through the dust. It asks us to look in the mirror, not the one on our wall, but the one in our minds. How much of what we wear, what we chase, is truly ours? How much is a performance, a desperate bid to be seen in a world that demands perfection? The wigs are gone, but their legacy endures, a cautionary tale of beauty, power, and the prices we pay to wear them.